Assalamu alaikum dear student. Today we are going to discuss another beautiful topic of evolution. And this topic is the spontaneous generation theory. It was believed that living creatures originated from spontaneously from the non-living matter. Although there is no sign to support the spontaneous generation, people keep this concept by their daily routine observation that basically occurs around them. Then we see Aristotle was the first to record this observation on the spontaneous generation. He described about the formation of the maggots from the decaying meat and suddenly appearance of the rat from the storage grain. However, this concept of Aristotle was unchallenged for more than 2000 years. In 1668, Francisco Redi was the first to disapprove the theory of the spontaneous generation. His experiment demonstrated that maggots arise from the flies and not from the decaying matter. Now let's discuss the Francisco Redi experiment. He has taken 3 bottles, 1, 2, 3. In the first bottle, he just opened the bottle with fresh meat. The flies were attracted to the meat. After some time, maggots appear on the meat. In bottle number 2, he closed the bottle of the fresh meat. No flies and the maggot observed. In the bottle number 3, he covered the bottle with a porous mesh. The flies were attracted toward the smell of the meat. Later, maggots were found on the mesh. However, the meat inside remained fresh. Let's discuss the conclusion of Francisco Redi experiment. The life is not raised spontaneously from the rotten matter. Life is necessary to produce another life. You can see in this picture that all these flies are attracted toward the smell of the meat and wait a moment. And you can see all this maggot appears on the mesh and this meat is still fresh. Later, there was many experimentation has been done by the scientists and the argument on the spontaneous generation has been done among the people. In 1676, after the discovery of microorganisms by the Leeuwenhoek, the argument on the spontaneous generation has taken new turn. Many scientists propose his theory that support the spontaneous generation for the microorganism, but not for the large living organism. In 1748, John Needham has observed microorganism in the meat broth that was not present at the beginning of the experiment. He concluded that bacteria originated from the meat. At the same time, Lazzaro Spallanzani has further approved his experiment. He boiled the meat broth and completely sealed the flask. The microorganism didn't grow. So he concluded that air carries germs to the broth in the Netherlands experiment. Later on, there was another scientist known as the Truden Schwann. He passed the air in the flask containing the broth through the red-hot tube. The broth in the flask do not show any growth of germs. Simultaneously, in 1850, George Frederick and Theodor von Dusch had allowed air to pass through the flask. By passing it through the sterile cotton plug, no growth is observed. They said that the cotton fiber have trapped the microbes from the external environment. The use of the cotton pluck to avoid microbial contamination even today. So this is a very important experiment. Later in 1861, Louis Pasteur completely disapproved the spontaneous generation concept by his swan neck experiment. Now let's discuss the Pasteur swan neck flask experiment. In the step number 1, the swan neck is filled with the broth. As you can see in the figure, the broth was boiled to kill the bacteria that was already present. Okay. The broth is allowed to cool and wait for some time. The broth did not show any growth. In the step number 2 process, he just taken another flask filled with the broth and the neck of the flask was broken. After some time, the color of the broth has changed due to the bacterial growth. So what is the summary of the experiment that is conducted by the Pasteur? Although the air could not enter the flask, the bacteria present in the air was trapped at the curve of the neck. Therefore, no growth is found in the step number 1. After breaking the neck, this is the neck, the bacteria could enter the flask and made the broth contaminated in the step number 2. Note a very important point that the Pasteur experiment has become a benchmark in the microbiology and lead to the germ theory of disease.